Before we dive into today's story, just imagine this. You're learning English by simply listening to stories. No boring grammar drills, no memorizing endless word lists, just enjoying a cool journey that trains your brain to understand and feel the language. If you like the sound of that, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and turn on the bell so you won't miss our daily stories. All right, let's jump in. Donald Trump had woken up early that morning, long before the sun decided to pour its soft light over Rome. Even though he was far from Washington, he carried the same weight on his shoulders. This trip wasn't just a vacation or a polite visit to take photos in front of famous buildings. No, it was about something far more serious, negotiations that could change the way two important nations work together. As he stood by the window of his luxurious hotel suite, he looked down at the streets. Rome was already awake. The air carried the smell of fresh bread, warm pastries, and strong coffee drifting up from the cafes. People moved below him, crossing streets, heading to work, chatting on their phones. It was a city that lived comfortably among its old stones. Ancient columns stood beside busy shops, and ruins sat quietly while scooters zipped past. Trump turned away from the view and walked across the thick carpet to review his notes once more. His team had prepared folders stacked with details, trade numbers, agricultural concerns, tourism interests, taxes, and even the delicate question of immigration cooperation. Each topic was a stone in a wall they hoped to build between two strong economies. He wasn't nervous, not exactly, but he did feel the familiar tightness in his chest. It was the same feeling that came before stepping onto a stage, or before answering a tough question in front of flashing cameras. It wasn't fear, it was the edge of competition. He liked that feeling. It kept him sharp. A short while later, dressed in a dark suit with a bright red tie, he left his hotel surrounded by a small crowd of advisors and security personnel. The streets greeted him with the low hum of morning traffic. A motorcade of sleek black vehicles waited, engines purring, ready to take him to Palazzo Chigi, the official residence of Italy's prime minister. As the cars rolled through narrow Roman streets, Trump glanced outside. They passed small markets opening their doors, street vendors setting up displays of colorful scarves and hats, and tourists squinting at maps. He noted how life in Rome seemed both busy and relaxed at the same time. There was urgency, but also a kind of calm. It was different from New York or Washington. Finally, they pulled into a courtyard surrounded by grand buildings. Stone walls rose high, decorated with flags, statues, and rows of elegant windows. Security officers stood by the doors, greeting the American visitors with practiced nods. Trump stepped out, buttoned his jacket, and climbed the steps with firm strides. Inside, the rooms were cool and silent. Marble floors reflected the high chandeliers. Paintings of past leaders and vast landscapes decorated the walls. Each piece seemed to whisper about centuries of Italian pride, diplomacy, and ambition. They led Trump to a conference hall where long tables waited, set neatly with water pitchers, glasses, notepads, and pens. Soon, Italian officials entered, offering polite greetings and small smiles. They spoke in English for the meeting, though the soft music of Italian still slipped into short, private comments among them. Trump shook hands with the Italian Prime Minister, a calm man with careful eyes. Neither leader made jokes or friendly chatter at first. This was serious work. They sat down across from each other, each surrounded by aides who flipped through documents and took quiet notes. The first topic on the agenda was trade. Italy had long exported fine goods, leather shoes, elegant suits, powerful cars, rich cheeses, bright olive oil. The United States imported plenty of these. Meanwhile, the U.S. wanted easier paths to sell agricultural products and technology services into Italy. There were questions about tariffs, standards, and certification. Numbers danced back and forth. Millions here, billions there, like pieces in a long game of chess. Trump leaned back slightly as he listened, his mind racing through possibilities. He was careful with his words, framing each sentence to sound both firm and open. He didn't want to look weak, but he also didn't want to close doors that could lead to future deals. As the Italian finance minister explained some recent changes in their tax policies, Trump tapped his fingers on the table once, twice. Then he interjected with a short statement about mutual benefits, highlighting how strong ties could lift both countries, creating jobs and growth on both sides of the Atlantic. He noticed how one Italian official adjusted his glasses and wrote something quickly on a pad, probably a note to revisit certain numbers. That was good. It meant they were listening closely. Soon, the conversation shifted to tourism. Italy, with its cathedrals, ancient ruins, sunny coastlines, and endless art, was already a magnet for American visitors. But new ideas were floated. Special packages, shared advertising campaigns, even talks of joint cultural festivals that could attract even more travelers. Trump nodded, thinking of the power of images, photos of Americans smiling under the Tuscan sun, eating gelato on old stone steps, shopping in Milan. Then came the harder subjects. Immigration was a delicate area. Both nations faced pressures, people seeking better lives, families fleeing difficult conditions, and governments struggling to balance open doors with national security. Trump spoke carefully, outlining how cooperation in tracking criminal networks could strengthen both countries' internal safety without harming ordinary people chasing dreams. The Italian officials listened with tight expressions. They knew their own voters worried about these same issues. Together, they began drafting early ideas for intelligence, sharing, and faster communication channels. Hours passed. Water glasses emptied and refilled. Advisors leaned in to whisper, slid new papers across the table. Trump occasionally cracked small smiles when a point landed well. Other times, he pressed his lips together and listened in silence, calculating the best next line. When they finally stood to break for a private lunch, Trump shook hands again with the Prime Minister. It was a firm, respectful shake. Neither side had gotten everything they wanted, not yet. But seeds had been planted. There would be more meetings, more drafts, more quiet phone calls in the middle of future nights. As he walked out into a sunlit balcony for a few moments of fresh air, Trump looked across the city's rooftops. Domes and bell towers rose in gentle waves. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the faint echo of church bells. Rome was old, patient, unhurried. It reminded him that real deals weren't built in a single morning. They needed time, trust, and 1,000 small choices made on days like this. He took a slow breath, letting the warm Italian air fill his lungs, and prepared to return inside for the next round. When Donald Trump returned to the conference hall after stepping out on the balcony, he noticed the atmosphere had shifted slightly. It wasn't exactly softer, but there was a subtle warmth now, like two chess players who, after several careful moves, recognized each other's skill and decided they could respect the match, even enjoy it a little. The Italian officials brought in a fresh round of documents. These pages weren't covered with hard numbers this time. Instead, they detailed shared cultural initiatives. Italy was proud of its language, its opera houses, its artists, its ancient history stretching back to Roman emperors and beyond. They wanted stronger student exchange programs and joint historical exhibitions in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Trump listened carefully. Even though he often focused on dollars and direct business advantages, he understood the power of culture. Art and education created bridges that money alone could not. When people travel for studies or performances, they formed lifelong memories. They built friendships that lasted decades, and that, in its quiet way, made countries lean toward peace rather than conflict. He nodded slowly as the Italian culture minister spoke, her hands moving gently to shape her words. When she finished, he leaned slightly forward and said a few words about how many Americans already loved Italy, not just the food and fashion, but the feeling of walking through streets that still remembered Caesar and Michelangelo. Strengthening these bonds could help keep younger generations curious and friendly toward each other's worlds. An Italian aide jotted something on a side paper. That note would probably turn into a bullet point in a late-night email, then into a talking point for another meeting. Tiny steps, but they all built the path. As the hours moved on, they took a short break for coffee in an elegant side room. Waiters in crisp uniforms brought silver trays with tiny cups of rich espresso. Trump accepted one, though he typically preferred larger American-style coffee. Still, he appreciated the ritual. The Italians seemed to grow even more animated when they discussed things over coffee, smiling slightly more, nodding to underline certain comments. Standing near a tall window that overlooked a courtyard garden, Trump listened as the Italian economic advisor explained how small businesses in Tuscany and Lombardy were hoping for smoother shipping rules. Many local artisans feared that new security inspections on international freight would delay their delicate products, fine ceramics, luxury textiles. Trump took a slow sip, letting the powerful coffee settle, then replied with a short suggestion about digital tracking improvements. Maybe with better systems, inspections could stay strict without slowing everything down. The advisor raised his eyebrows, clearly intrigued. That was the kind of detail that could actually change daily life for hundreds of family businesses. Another Italian official scribbled a note. Later, they returned to the main hall, where fresh glasses of mineral water waited. Sunlight now streamed through the high windows at a gentle angle. It was well past noon, probably close to 2 p.m., but there was still much to discuss. The conversation moved into security. Italy sat in a complex neighborhood. The Mediterranean brought migrants from Africa and conflict zones, and organized crime sometimes used the same routes for darker trades. Trump highlighted intelligence sharing agreements that the U.S. had with other European partners and suggested Italy could join similar operations. In return, he hinted the United States might consider certain trade preferences. The Italian Interior Minister looked thoughtful. Security was always a hot topic in Italian elections, just like in the U.S. They didn't promise anything on the spot, but agreed to schedule expert meetings. That was a common way in diplomacy to say, "We're not saying yes, but we're not saying no either." It kept doors open without locking leaders into commitments too quickly. Trump accepted that. He'd been in enough rooms to know how long real policy changes could take. Sometimes months, sometimes years. What mattered was leaving today with a sense that both sides had earned respect and found possible areas to grow. As afternoon drifted toward evening, the mood lightened a little more. A few quiet jokes passed across the table. Not belly-laugh jokes, just small ironies that made people smile and loosen stiff shoulders. Then an Italian protocol officer entered and invited the group for a private tour of part of the palace. Trump agreed. Walking the halls gave everyone a chance to drop the hard business masks, at least slightly. They moved slowly through marble corridors where paintings stared down from gilded frames. Trump paused at one massive canvas that showed a medieval battle, knights in armor, horses rearing, flags twisting in the wind. His guide explained it was a victory over a rival city-state, hundreds of years before Italy was unified. Trump nodded, filing away the idea. Countries that looked peaceful today often had centuries of tough history under their feet. Maybe that was why Italians negotiated so carefully. They were raised among stories of alliances and betrayals stretching back 1,000 years. Next, the guide led them into a high-ceilinged room where the walls were covered in tapestries. Each scene told a fragment of ancient myth, heroes fighting monsters, gods disguised as mortals, beautiful women weaving spells. Trump took it in with quiet appreciation. He wasn't here as a tourist, but moments like this reminded him of the human part of diplomacy. History wasn't just old buildings. It was a long memory of what people valued, fought for, and preserved. Finally, they returned to the main meeting room to collect briefcases and exchange final polite remarks. Trump shook hands once more with the Italian Prime Minister. This time, it was slightly warmer, like two business rivals who might one day become partners. They hadn't settled every matter, no serious negotiation ever did in a single day, but they had laid down lines that could turn into real agreements. As he walked back toward the waiting motorcade, Trump felt a measured satisfaction. He liked winning, and he always preferred to leave meetings in a position of strength. But he also understood that long-term wins came from many days like this, strung together carefully. Once inside his armored vehicle, he let out a small sigh, loosening his tie just a bit. The streets of Rome rolled past again, now bathed in the softer gold of late afternoon. Tourists snapped photos. Locals hurried home with shopping bags. Old men sat on benches talking with their hands. Trump looked out the window, replaying key moments in his head. The hesitations, the half-promises, the careful signals of interest. He also thought about how he'd shape the public story back home. Maybe he'd emphasize job growth from future trade, or highlight cooperation on security. Narrative mattered. It set the stage for the next rounds, and for how voters understood these quiet hours spent in echoing palace halls. As they drove on, he checked his watch, close to 4 p.m. now. Dinner would come later, maybe with his team at a high-end Roman restaurant. But for the moment, he was content to simply watch the city slip by. Statues, fountains, tiny cars parked impossibly close. Rome wasn't Washington. It didn't rush. It existed at its own ancient pace. He found himself almost appreciating that. Almost. That evening, Donald Trump sat at a long private table in a discreet Roman restaurant tucked down a narrow street paved with old cobblestones. The restaurant's name was painted in small letters on a wooden sign. No neon, no flash, just understated luxury. Inside, low lights cast a golden glow over polished wood and rows of wine bottles stacked behind glass. He was surrounded by members of his team, advisors, a few security staff at the edges, and some Italian business figures who had been invited for dinner to continue the informal talks. Plates of fine pasta arrived, followed by delicately grilled fish. Trump normally liked simpler fare, steaks, burgers, but he could appreciate quality when it was set before him. He took a forkful, nodded slightly, then set it down so he could listen more closely. Across from him sat an influential Italian industrial leader. This man controlled factories that made specialized machinery used around the world, including in several American plants. They talked about supply chains, how costs had surged after recent global disruptions, and what incentives might keep Italian products flowing reliably into American markets without triggering protectionist pushback. Trump leaned back, fingers steepled under his chin, absorbing every detail. He didn't commit to anything solid. That was never his way on first dinners. But he spoke just enough to keep hopes alive, suggestions of tax adjustments, possible easing of certain import checks, provided it benefited American factories in the end. This was the soft power side of business and diplomacy. No flashing cameras, no formal communiques, just plates being cleared and dessert arriving while serious calculations unfolded in people's minds. When coffee came, thick and strong again, served in tiny cups, Trump finally broke into a faint grin. "This is good," he remarked quietly to an aide. He didn't just mean the coffee. The entire dinner was a sign that after hours of formal bargaining, the Italians still wanted to build something more. That was leverage for him to take home. By 10 p.m., the group began to break up. Hands were shaken again, polite kisses on cheeks exchanged among the Italians, and promises to stay in close contact repeated in the musical cadence of Italian English. Trump left the restaurant to the quiet echo of his shoes on the stone walk. The streets of Rome weren't exactly empty. Couples still strolled arm in arm. A street musician played a soft tune, but it was calm, peaceful in a way that let heavy thoughts float and settle. Back at his hotel, Trump spent a little time reviewing notes his staff had prepared. They highlighted tentative deals, more cultural exchange programs, exploratory talks on cooperative port security, and potential reductions in certain tariff threats if Italian suppliers met stricter quality benchmarks. Not ironclad victories, but respectable groundwork. He knew headlines back in the States would be split. Some would praise the openings with Italy as a smart move to strengthen European ties. Others would call it too soft or question the benefits. Trump had long ago learned to measure his success by more than a day's headlines. The real payoff was how future meetings built on today. Would Italian ministers push these ideas forward back home? Would more Italian investors start looking at U.S. opportunities because they felt Washington was open to them? That's where momentum turned into real numbers, real factories, real jobs. Sitting by the wide hotel window, he looked out over the rooftops of Rome. Church domes, old stone towers, the occasional sleek modern office building. In the distance, the lights of cars moved along the river roads. Somewhere under all that, ancient foundations still stood, parts of old Roman walls, even ruins that predated Caesar by centuries. It struck him again how old these alliances were in spirit, even if the modern countries only signed documents in the last 100 years. Italy and America shared millions of people. Entire families had crossed the Atlantic generations ago, chasing dreams of better pay, more freedom, less crowded streets. Now their descendants built skyscrapers in New York, ran farms in Iowa, ran tech startups in Austin. He closed the binder of briefing notes and allowed himself a moment to just think like an individual, not the leader of a major nation. In a way, deals with Italy were always personal for many Americans. They weren't abstract statistics, they were family trees. In the morning, he'd meet briefly with reporters before flying out. He rehearsed a few lines in his head, ways to emphasize job growth, the promise of security partnerships, the cultural ties that could blossom into new tourism and student movements. Each line crafted to reassure different audiences: industrial workers in Ohio, farmers in Wisconsin, small business owners in Pennsylvania who might one day export leather goods or farm machinery to Italian markets. As midnight came and went, he finally stood, straightened his tie again, and gave a small nod to no one in particular. Tomorrow was a new day, and the negotiation never truly ended. Relationships like this had to be nurtured, defended, sometimes pushed aggressively, sometimes allowed to mature on their own. When he lay back in the wide hotel bed, the last thing he noticed before drifting off was the faint sound of the city, distant cars, a bell from some hidden church striking 12 times, then silence. Without realizing it, you just absorbed dozens of rich English structures, from subtle conditional forms to elegant descriptive phrases, diplomatic vocabulary, and persuasive connectors. That's the hidden magic of stories like this. While following a gripping tale of Trump negotiating with Italy, you've been training your brain to understand and eventually speak like this, naturally and confidently. If you found this story interesting, and feel like you learned even a little today, smash that like button, subscribe so you never miss our daily English learning stories, and drop a comment telling us which part of this negotiation impressed you the most, the cultural talks, the business maneuvering, or the security discussions. We'd love to read your thoughts, and we answer everyone. Keep coming back every day. Together, we'll turn your English from average to absolutely powerful.